Have you ever felt that almost electric vibration that races down your spine when you walk into an ancient church, sense the heavy silence, and suddenly realize you are surrounded by statues that seem to watch your every step? Imagine that each face carved in wood keeps a secret buried many centuries ago. If you stay with me until the final echo of this story, you will discover how seemingly ordinary men and women, forgotten deities, improbable political pacts, and intricate theological dreams wove together the gallery of saints that still fascinates, comforts, and even intimidates. And while we dive into layers of history rarely revealed, take a moment to subscribe right now to Omnisent, because every tale here delivers astonishing curiosities and reflections capable of challenging your faith or your skepticism. Picture the close of the 2nd century. The sun has not yet risen as small groups of Christians thread their way through narrow alleys in Jerusalem, Antioch, and Rome. They hide in adobe houses because they fear the imperial guard. In those underground refuges, there are no marble altars or colored stained glass. Only the glow of an oil lamp and rough sketches on the walls. The outline of a fish hinting at hope. The curve of an anchor promising steadfastness. The figure of a shepherd carrying a wounded sheep across his shoulders. Into this setting steps Polycarp of Smyrna, an elderly bishop who refuses to call the emperor Lord. He is arrested, taken to the local stadium, and burned alive before the crowd. His death jolts the conscience of the flock. His courage becomes fuel for the faith of those who remain. Companions gather fragments of bone, record the date of his martyrdom, and visit his grave every year. Unknowingly, they plant the first seed of veneration, the memory of someone who becomes a mirror for other hearts. Throughout the 3rd century, Rome decides that Christianity is a political threat. Provincial governors receive orders to extract confessions and demand sacrifices to the state gods. Christians who refuse are beheaded, crucified, or thrown to wild beasts in the Colosseum. The blood spectacle, designed to distract the populace, ends up creating the opposite effect. Every execution generates rumors of supernatural fortitude. People tell of Blandina in Lugdunum, a frail slave who endures whips, red-hot griddles, and still sings hymns to her last breath. They tell of Cyprian in Carthage, a bishop who hands his garments to the executioners and thanks the headsman for letting him die for Christ. To scattered communities, these stories are worth more than armies. They prove that a single life can turn terror into testimony. There is still no official word saint, yet spiritual magnetism already radiates from blood poured out in hope. Then comes a twist no persecutor or persecuted believer could have imagined. Constantine, an emperor's son and ambitious general, dreams on the eve of a decisive battle along the Tiber River. He sees a radiant cross in the sky accompanied by the words, "In this sign you will conquer." He takes the omen as a promise. The next day he defeats Maxentius and enters Rome triumphant. 2 years later, in the year 313, he signs the Edict of Milan. For the first time in nearly 3 centuries, professing the Christian faith is no longer a crime. Yet the empire remains deeply pagan. Temples dedicated to Mars, Venus, and Apollo dot the cities. Agricultural festivals invoke the gods of the fields. Soldiers swear loyalty to Jupiter before marching. Destroying those customs would spark civil war. Ignoring them would show weakness. Constantine chooses a diplomatic path. He rebaptizes traditions in the name of Christ, absorbing ancient feasts and clothing popular figures in new meaning. That is when pagan divinities and heroes cross the threshold into Christianity and receive new names. The Celtic goddess Brigid, guardian of creative fire and field fertility, reappears as Saint Bridget of Ireland, founder of monasteries and patron of blacksmiths. Hercules, a demigod of immense strength who slays monsters, inspires Saint Christopher, a giant who crosses a turbulent river carrying a child who later reveals himself as Christ. Apollo's archetype, a handsome young archer, is reborn in paintings of Saint Sebastian, a slender body pierced by arrows, symbol of incorruptible purity. Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, lends his name to Saint Denis of Paris, a bishop whose martyrdom involves walking while holding his own head. Perseus, slayer of Medusa, inspires Saint George, the knight who wounds the dragon and frees a city. The calendar undergoes a similar metamorphosis. The Celtic festival Samhain, celebrated on the 1st of November to mark the harvest's end, becomes the solemnity of All Saints. The Roman Lupercalia, a feast of fertility in February, is replaced by the memory of Saint Valentine, defender of love, who defies imperial decrees. The Saturnalia, a late December gift-giving celebration, turns into Christmas, the feast of Jesus' birth. This cultural maneuver reduces conflict and convinces multitudes they can keep cherished customs while embracing a new faith. As politics realigns, copyist monks in Irish, Welsh, and Italian monasteries labor through the night by lamplight. They transcribe gospels, but also compose biographies of martyrs. These narratives, called hagiographies, describe wonders so vivid they verge on the fantastic. A mild lion licks Saint Thecla's feet. The fire that envelops Polycarp exhales the fragrance of fresh-baked bread. Angels descend to crown Saint Cecilia when the executioner's blade fails 3 times. Some details are literary adornment, yet they serve a teaching purpose. When a young reader learns how Saint Martin cuts his cloak to cover a beggar, he grasps charity faster than from lengthy theological treatises. When a widow hears how Saint Lucy stares down a governor without blinking, she renews courage to withstand the pressure of a pagan empire. As the 7th century dawns, another phenomenon shakes the religious board. Islam is born on the Arabian Peninsula and spreads swiftly across the Middle East and North Africa. Christians, feeling encircled, reinforce symbols of identity. Relics gain incalculable value. A martyr's bone, a virgin's lock of hair, a fragment of apostolic tunic are deemed direct bridges to heaven. Entire cities prosper around these treasures. Tours, in Gaul, grows around the tomb of Saint Martin. Compostela, in the Iberian Peninsula, thrives thanks to the supposed sepulchre of Saint James. Pilgrims walk hundreds of leagues guided by the promise of healing or forgiveness. Where some see sincere devotion, others see business opportunities. Merchants soon hawk virgin's milk that is really perfumed resin, or crown of thorns spines clipped from ordinary shrubs. The line between faith and exploitation remains thin. Even so, millions feel their hearts ignite whenever they touch a reliquary or light a candle before a bone wrapped in silk. So far, we have crossed 3 centuries of persecution, an imperial conversion, and the beginning of the syncretism that fused ancient pantheons with Christianity. Yet the story of images has not reached its climax. That climax will come when church leaders gather to debate whether it is lawful to paint or sculpt the sacred, and when, centuries later, reformers tear down those same images accusing the church of idolatry. These will be the themes of the next blocks. Until then, remember, every carved face carries not only faith, but politics, poetry, blood, and a dash of cultural diplomacy. If those statues could speak, they might tell you they were born of a silent pact between the fears of the people and the shrewdness of an emperor who needed to knit a crisis-ridden empire together. When the calendar reaches the early 8th century, the political map of the Mediterranean is on fire. In Constantinople's throne room sits Leo III, a soldier hardened by wars against Arabs and Persians. He faces earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and naval defeats that seem like divine punishments. The emperor concludes that God's anger is due to the excess of images venerated in the churches. He therefore orders mosaics to be scraped, icons to be burned, and sculptures to be ground to dust. Thus begins the iconoclastic crisis. Painters hide wooden panels in caves, monks flee carrying small portraits of Christ folded in their cloaks, widows bury icons in their yards to save the memory that sustains their prayer. The conflict lasts more than 1 century. On one side, the iconoclasts claim that honoring images repeats Israel's sin at the foot of the golden calf. On the other, defenders of the icons remind everyone that God himself became visible in Jesus. To deny art would be to deny the incarnation. Monks such as John of Damascus write fiery treatises, declaring that painting Christ is a proclamation that the Word put on flesh. Persecutions alternate as emperors change their minds. Some send prisoners to salt mines, others cut artists' ears, yet the flame of creativity does not go out. We arrive at the year 787 when Empress Irene gathers bishops and papal legates in the city of Nicaea. In long corridors heavy with incense, theologians argue through the night. The final decision declares that images may remain because the honor given to them rises to the divine prototype, just as the fragrance of incense rises to heaven. They define 3 degrees of veneration: latria, full adoration reserved for God; hyperdulia, singular honor given to Mary; and dulia, respect offered to the saints. This distinction prevents art from being confused with idolatry and unleashes an explosion of color. Domes receive mosaics that glitter like stars. Walls gain frescoes narrating the lives of martyrs. Blue and crimson stained glass floods the naves with light that looks like aquarium water. While the East overcomes the crisis, Latin Christendom lives another transformation. The barbarian kingdoms that toppled Rome now embrace the faith. Benedictine monks teach farming, literacy, and liturgy. The idea emerges that saints can act as patrons of guilds and professions. Carpenters adopt Joseph, fishermen call on Peter, travelers carry medals of Christopher. Stories of these patrons move in medieval ballads. A wandering singer recites that Catherine of Alexandria debated 50 pagan philosophers and defeated them all, inspiring students in the new universities of Bologna and Paris. At the same time, pilgrimages become the backbone of popular devotion. Men and women fasten the scallop shell to their cloaks and walk to Compostela, believing that St. James fights demons on the road beside them. Others cross the Alps, speaking different dialects, yet unite their voices, chanting the Kyrie before the tomb of St. Martin of Tours. Hostels flourish. Bridges are built, villages gain fairs. Wherever faith walks, the economy blossoms. Yet where faith attracts wealth, it also attracts deceit. Merchants begin to sell miraculous powder taken from the supposed tomb of Lazarus. Though it is nothing more than ground plaster, the border between reverence and fraud remains fragile. During the same period, crusades inflame the Christian imagination. Popes summon knights to march toward Jerusalem, promising complete indulgences. Warriors carry banners with the image of St. George piercing the dragon, a symbol of victory over Muslim evil. In return, many crusaders discover that the Holy Land already honors its own saints, such as George of Lydda or Elias of Nazareth, shared by Eastern Christians. The mosaic of devotions becomes global long before the word global exists. We press forward to the 13th century. King Alfonso of Castile commissions the Golden Legend from Archbishop Jacob of Voragine. It is a collection of saints' lives written in lilting Latin. Scribes multiply the manuscript, and soon it circulates from Lisbon to Krakow. There we find stories that fling wide the doors of imagination. Saint Margaret swallowed by a dragon and freed by divine intervention, or Saint Nicholas raising 3 children preserved in a barrel of brine. It matters little whether they are facts or metaphors. What matters are the moral lessons and the hope they sow. Art drinks deeply from these tales. Sculptors carve dragons on Gothic arches. Painters portray translucent bodies pierced by golden arrows. Playwrights adapt miracles for crowded town squares. In that same century, Francis of Assisi restores freshness to the ideal of holiness. He abandons luxury, embraces lepers, and speaks with wolves and birds. His voluntary poverty contrasts with bishops draped in crimson silk. The people fall in love. Less than 2 years after his death, the Holy See recognizes his miracles and declares him a saint. Italian artists paint his life in giant sequential scenes on Assisi's walls that resemble vast comic strips. Francis shows that sanctity can be poetry, respect for nature, prophetic protest, and dancing joy beneath a star-strewn sky. As the Middle Ages reach artistic peak, fissures appear in the institutional foundation. Indulgences linked to pilgrimages or monetary donations become popular. Theologians explain that the Church administers a treasury of merits accumulated by Christ and the saints. One who contributes with charity or money may have part of one's sins erased. The idea begins as a gesture of mercy during epidemics, yet slides into blatant commerce. Itinerant preachers promise instant pardon to anyone who drops coins into cathedral coffers. In some regions, believers come to think they can buy letters guaranteeing years of paradise in advance for deceased relatives. These abuses boil over at the start of the 16th century. When the Dominican Tetzel travels through Germany selling indulgences to finance St. Peter's Basilica, Martin Luther answers with 95 theses nailed to the church door in Wittenberg. He does not reject the existence of saints, but condemns their economic exploitation. John Calvin in Geneva goes further. He removes images from temples, scrapes, frescoes, and dismantles side altars. Iconoclastic Protestantism is born. The debate over saints becomes a watershed. For Catholics, saints remain models and intercessors. For Reformed believers, they represent distractions that pull attention away from the only mediator, Jesus. The Council of Trent in the 16th century responds with strict regulations. Miracles for canonization must have reliable witnesses, medical investigation, and solid documentation. The Congregation of Rites is born, seed of today's dicastery for the causes of saints. Jesuit, Capuchin, and Dominican scholars study candidates' lives like historians, aiming to weed out extravagant legends. Even so, popular imagination stays fertile. In the newly colonized Americas, missionaries present European saints, yet indigenous peoples discern echoes of pre-Columbian deities. Guadalupe in Mexico recalls the goddess Tonantzin. St. James on a white horse evokes Toltec warriors. The cultural fusion continues, now on a new continent. The 18th century ushers in the Enlightenment. Atheist or deist philosophers point out ironies. If God is perfect, why need celestial secretaries? Voltaire laughs at processions bearing relics during epidemics, while physicians preach hygiene. The cult of saints undergoes intellectual critique, yet endures in village hearts. Meanwhile, Baroque artists create hypnotic images, angels that seem to float in Brazilian churches, cedar saints with faces of ecstasy. In the 19th century, scientific positivism rises. The Church responds by canonizing figures tied to charity and science, such as Saint John of God, patron of hospitals, and Saint Catherine Labouré, whose miraculous medal spreads through modernizing Paris. It is also the century of Marian apparitions. Lourdes and Fatima draw millions. Mary shines as great intercessor, heir to archetypes of the Great Mother revered since the cults of Isis or Cybele. Once more, the feminine becomes a bridge between human and divine. By the 20th century, the pace of communication redefines holiness. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is filmed embracing lepers. Pope John Paul II is seen on television praying with youth in Olympic stadiums. Sanctity gains instant global face. Yet the same century reveals wounds. The Vatican removed Saint Philomena from the calendar in 1961, citing lack of historical proof. Saint Christopher's feast is reduced. The message is clear. Critical review continues, even when it contradicts long-held devotions. The second half of the 20th century brings another controversy: rapid canonizations. John Paul II, declared a saint just 9 years after his death in 2005, stirs both admiration and suspicion. Admirers hail his healing miracles, critics recall his management during abuse scandals. The question returns: sanctity or politics? By contrast, figures like Oscar Romero, martyred Bishop of El Salvador, wait decades for official recognition, showing that canonization is never fully immune to geopolitical currents. We enter the 21st century. Images once dependent on paintbrushes now gain digital filters. A meme shows Saint Anthony holding not the child Jesus, but a phone seeking Wi-Fi signal. Devotion reinvents itself in pop language, yet the old questions persist. Is this true veneration or covert idolatry? Where is the healthy line between reverence and superstition? Psychologists observe a positive placebo effect in living faith, while sociologists warn of charlatans profiting by selling amulets. Meanwhile, the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints updates its procedures. It ensures transparency, checks civil archives, and uses independent medical experts. 2 miracles are still required, though magnetic resonance scans and university reports are accepted. Behind the scenes, debates over recent popes' canonizations and pressure from devotees remain intense. In the year 2024, Pope Francis canonizes Maria Antonia de Paz y Figueroa, known as Mama Antula, the first saint born in Argentina. Some hail this as a victory for Latin American piety. Others see political recognition for an entire continent. Benefits remain unmistakable. Saints' lives inspire volunteers, build hospitals, schools, shelters. Saint Laura Montoya motivates indigenous peoples to defend their land. Saint Camillus de Lelis inspires nurses during pandemics, yet harms persist. Desperate people abandon medical treatment, trusting only in promises of miraculous cure. Radical groups wield saints as banners to exclude minorities. The same fire that warms can also burn. Now the camera drops to the personal level. Picture a woman who loses her job and lights a candle to Saint Joseph the Worker, seeking protection. Is that idolatry, or a symbolic therapy that calms anxiety and reactivates hope, letting her seek new opportunities? The line between superstition and legitimate psychological resource is thin. Pastoral reality shows that symbols speak where words fail. An icon can silently embrace a wounded heart that cannot bear doctrinal discourse. Let us return to Scripture, the foundation of everything. In Exodus, Moses receives the command not to make carved images for worship. In Psalm 115, the poet mocks metal idols with mouths that do not speak. Isaiah denounces artisans who use half a log to cook food and the other half to craft a lifeless god. Yet the same sacred text describes golden cherubim atop the ark and the bronze serpent raised by Moses to heal Israelites. The Bible does not simply forbid matter, it condemns a heart that places absolute trust in a created thing. Catholic theology replies with a triple distinction: latria for God, hyperdulia for Mary, dulia for the saints. It affirms that any honor given to a servant of Christ ultimately returns to the Creator. Protestantism prefers a faith without intermediate bars. For many Reformed believers, the only effective intercessor is Jesus, and any image risks diverting the simple faith that saves. Remember also that not every saint is canonized in Rome. In the Orthodox churches, there are thousands recognized by local synods. They include mystics, monarchs, holy fools who drank from the desert's well, and legends of child martyrs. Each tradition reinforces communal values. In Ethiopia, Saint Tekle Haimano prays standing so many years that his feet dissolve. In Russia, Xenia of St. Petersburg feigns madness to give her possessions to the poor unnoticed. These stories show how the idea of holiness molds itself to cultural context. Beyond Christianity, the same hunger is visible. In Buddhism, bodhisattvas postpone nirvana to aid sentient beings. In Hinduism, sadhus leave behind identity to embody the divine presence. Even non-believers find ethical heroes such as Gandhi or Martin Luther King who, though not canonized, inspire almost religious devotion. The craving for examples belongs not to one creed alone, but to the human heart yearning for transcendence. So, what is the origin of all saints? It is the need to give a face to the invisible. It is courage turned into metaphor that carries generations. It is a pact between memory and imagination. It is the dance of light and shadow where virtue and power contend. Above all, it is the mirror showing what we could become if the flame of generosity consumed our selfishness. If tomorrow every cathedral vanished and every statue shattered, would holiness die? Or would it rise in new stories? Perhaps in a doctor risking life in a war zone, or a teacher guiding refugee children. The greatest lesson is not to worship stone or wood, but to grasp that every human being carries a seed of radical compassion. We have reached the turning point. Breathe and look within. Ask yourself, who is your favorite saint? Perhaps it is Francis who spoke with birds, Teresa who danced while sweeping the convent, or an anonymous grandmother whispering prayers for the entire family. Keeping such examples in your heart can feed courage to face crises. Yet remember, none of them replaces your own journey. They are beacons. You steer the boat. Before we part, here is an invitation. Share in the comments the story of sanctity that most touched your life, and suggest themes for our next deep dives. If you have not subscribed yet, do so now, because on Omnisent, each episode stretches horizons that often lie dormant. Finally, ponder this question echoing across centuries. Are images open doors to mystery, or curtains hiding the Creator's true brilliance? The answer, my friend, lives in how you decide to look. Go in peace, keep the flame of inquiry alive, and remember, holiness is not trapped on pedestals. It waits, dormant, inside every brave choice you make today.